right. Wow. Thank you for allowing me to be up here. This is really exciting. So, we able to start my slides, Mr. Perry? So, I've got 50 odd slides to get through. So hopefully, we'll be able to get cracking onto this. Plenty of time? Good. All right. I wasn't too sure. This is actually the first time I've been up here to present this particular topic in this kind of format. So, as Warren suggested just before, is that last time I was here, we were only able to catch the end of it, but we got talking for, feels like hours afterwards, actually. So, but it's the same topic that I'm going to sort of cover off on today, which is going to be really good. So, thank you for allowing me to come up here. Looking forward to it. So, let's get stuck into it. So, I'm going to play this clicker. So first of all, a little bit about myself. So we, as Warren just pointed out, we do attend this church. So we are local, but we weren't always local. So I grew up down here back in the 90s, left in 2000, married a lovely Frankston girl, and then we came down here 20 years later. So I've got a little bit of a heart for Wonthaggi. I must admit, I did originally come down begrudgingly, as most people who know, but God definitely called us down here in order to plant our roots, which is very good, and happy to be here. So, but I do just want to sort of highlight the fact, sorry, I'm pressing two buttons here. This is new to me. Here we go, I got two. So I do just want to sort of highlight a little bit about who I am. So I'm a Christian, husband, father, businessman first, followed by now a speaker. I love finding what the third side of the coin is. If you sort of ever heard that term, there's a front, there's a back, and there's a side. I really love the side. I find that's where the meat actually is. I find that really interesting. I love the connection between biblical history and the modern world, and I could imagine anybody who's attended this church in particular or been a part of the BI message for a long period of time will attest to the fact that there's such a passion towards these connections that you discover. So I'm certainly the beneficiary of that, and growing up in this church in particular with Pastor Chris, it's been fantastic. The third one I'll mention though is that I'm very much a bit of an anti-usury believer. So the biblical sense of the term usury, debts, be a slave to the lender, which is some of what I'm going to cover off on today, but certainly in accordance with scriptural principles. I'm fascinated by how the money system works, and by extension gold, silver, and crypto. And I've been keen interested in helping young people, younger generations, make godly honouring decisions, I think, around these particular topics. So, I can talk for hours on it. This is going to be a little bit more structured, a little bit more formal. So hopefully we can get through it. So, but I do want to tell you a story. So when I was 8 years old, I actually remember the location and the time that this actually happened. But I was driving past, if you know Wonthaggi, there's a McDonald's. And I was driving with my dad, and I was 8 years old. And he said to me, he goes, I don't know where this came from, but he said, do you know the world's controlled by a bunch of, high-powered people? Like, he called them the Illuminati. I was like, no, really? This is fascinating, right? At the time, I couldn't spell it, so I couldn't actually research it, but I did, however, go down to the library here in town, which had 1,000 books, and I was too nervous to ask the librarian if they had any books on the Illuminati. Now, I had no idea whether they would or they wouldn't, but certainly for 1,000 books they wouldn't have. But I wanted to research it, right? And so I went down this path of going, what is my dad telling me about when I was 8 years old? But for some reason it was a marker and it stuck. The good part about it is that it didn't disrupt my childhood too much because I couldn't really spell it, couldn't really research it. But by the time I got into my 20s, the GFC happened. I was married at this point, and 2008 came along. Now, I was in web design at the time, and by God's grace, not only did I have a phenomenal upbringing here, but I also just ran into people randomly that my brain just triggered. There's connections here, and one of which was I built a website for a guy who ran a conservative critique website, and he would critique the media and he'd critique the news. And I didn't really sort of think too much of it when I built the website originally, but then when I go into his office, he'd have all these radio stations playing and he'd be recording everything. He'd have all the TV stations playing, recording them. And he actually would go to Canberra and he'd advise on the government, the Labor Party particularly, Liberal Party particularly. And but that's what he did. And I built him this website, and it was really quite fascinating because whenever I had a question, I could actually ask him and he'd have the evidence. So when Kevin 07, if you all remember the Kevin 07 campaign, one of the things that happened with Kevin 07 was that he went over to the US and he went to meet a fellow by the name of Rupert Murdoch. Now, show of hands, who knows who that is? I think we all do, right? So he goes over there, but he comes back, and what's fascinating is that the Fairfax media, which was the competing media at the time, were just asking him lots of questions about why he was there and what he was doing, right? And he said, oh, no, I was just, going to New York for a holiday, I think he might have said. And so I went to this guy and I said, listen, can you show me with evidence the pre and post narrative around Kevin Rudd at the time, Kevin07, pre this date and post this date? And because he collected newspapers and he recorded the media, he could show me. I said, that's fascinating, you know. Anyway, he gets in, bit of stuff going on. I think Julia Gillard then took over at that point, and then all of a sudden they wanted to put all these windmills everywhere. And I looked at Malcolm Turnbull, who was the opposition leader at the time, and he would not be opposing it. And I sat there and I thought they're supposed to oppose it. Like, I thought that was actually the whole, being, the opposition, right? You would have thought that, yeah? And he wasn't. So I thought, I started digging into it. And what I discovered was that Malcolm Turnbull used to work for the banks. And that made me start to think, okay, so if he worked for the banks, well then which bank, right? Not Commonwealth. Yeah. That wasn't a joke, but good one, hey? So anyway, as I went down this path, I started to sort of look at this, and I sat down and I thought, this is really interesting. Like, these two people are singing from the same playbook. And I thought, what is going on? And this is a young 20-year-old, and, Google was around and YouTube was, I think, just starting and what have you. But this was real evidence. So one of the things that I like to do when I ever share any of these kind of theories or ideas or, conspiracies, I guess some people would say, to people, is I only like to talk about things I can actually verify. I think that's really important because as people go down any of these messages, I think it's actually even a stumbling block for the BI message, is people think that it's not rooted in evidence. I think it's really important for us to sort of stay in that truth line. And so everything that I like to talk about, I can tend to verify either through first-hand or very closely first or second-hand information. So I want to make that sort of very clear and consider that a little bit of a disclaimer. But from that point onwards, it's pricked my interest, and obviously you follow the rabbit trail and you end up at the Federal Reserve, and then you end up who's above the Federal Reserve. And so that's kind of part of what I'm going to talk about today, because there is actually a connection between what's been happening for the last 200 years in our monetary system, monetary policy, to the message that we preach here at this conference and moving forward. But I want to sort of divert really quickly. I hear that when you're a presenter at a seminar that you're supposed to show some swag. So what that actually led to is about 10 years ago, I published a magazine called Bullion. You can't get it anymore. I actually tried to get a box of them down here for all of you to take one. You feel free to photocopy this. But this is still relevant today. Now, I'm not showing it to you because I'm trying to sort of get you to buy it. You feel free to copy it as much as you want. But the reason I'm showing it to you, there you go, there's my lovely face from 10 years ago. But there's a bunch of articles in here that I hint at the connection between the biblical history and monetary, right? And so I would have loved, I don't know how it all sort of, I guess it was the turn of digital, but we only managed to produce one. And it's very sacred to me, the fact that we actually did it, because it was a really great experience. But if we had the chance to do more, would have loved to have slowly intertwined some of what I'm going to sort of share with you today. So feel free, I'll leave this here for the weekend, it's no big deal. But photocopy it behind, feel free to have a look, and if you like any articles, take them with you. But we did do that 10 years ago. So have got a little bit of sort of knowledge around this particular space, and gold, silver, as you'd be aware, is certainly God's money. So what do these dates have in common? Any ideas? No idea? I wouldn't expect you to know. But I'm just going to highlight some. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of these dates. I'm going to show some really interesting connections. But to start with these dates, so 1760. Oh shoot, hang on. Oh, you're following along. Thank you. Do that for me because. All right. So there we go. I forgot. My bad. First time. I was here. That's right, yes, dual screens. You've got me all flustered, but I was talking to Perry just before, and he was showing me one of the young ladies, he was doing the stars, was it? Yeah. Oh man, I'm so keen to sort of have a look at that. So it's actually really cool that there's people coming up here that are talking about some really interesting stuff in and around the BI message, which I really like. So I'll do this one, 1760. So that's the year that Rothschild banking business began in Germany. Now, I'm going to just sort of do an umbrella. There'll be questions at the end, and then we'll sort of drill down. So he established it in 1760. Believe it or not, he was 16. So it's kind of, as you'll probably be aware throughout history, that sometimes history can be a little bit corrupted. If you actually do the math, you're 16 years old. So Did he have this massive big banking empire at 1760? I doubt it, but he was 16 years old, and that's when they say that it started. So, but it did lay the foundation for what we sort of see today. His children were sent in later years around the world to go set up other banks in other countries. So keep that date in the back of your mind. Next one that's really important is 1822. Now this is a sad one, but this is actually the last... 1826, my bad. What did I actually say? Well, believe it or not, there's still martyrs happening today, so it is unfortunate. But this particular one is the last recorded one, Christian martyr by the Vatican, which I think is really important. So it was actually a gentleman in Spain. He was a school teacher, and he refused to sort of bow down to the Catholic doctrine, and this is what happened. So important date as part of my topic. But this one's interesting, 1832. So only a few years later, the Vatican, the Rothschilds became the Vatican's bank. And I'm going to sort of go through sort of some of the backstory as to why this happened and how it happened, but specifically keep that date in mind. So that's our commonality between the three dates. But bear this in mind too, is that there's money and power never disappear. They just simply change hands. So something to keep in the back of your mind is that whenever you see something that, let's say for example, last couple of years, you probably heard these stories about BlackRock and Vanguard. Well, BlackRock and Vanguard are actually just they're an umbrella for another company that was going bust, and we do know why they were going bust. So we actually researched this about 10, 15 years ago, and there was other big companies, and what they've done is they've done a shadow switch. So the reality is the money and the power doesn't disappear. That's a side topic. Doesn't disappear, it just simply changes hands. So, but by the grace of God, it still moves forward. So I want to just highlight too that I don't profess to sort of be an expert on the Catholic Church, and obviously, the connections between, say, Babylon, Antichrist, some of the things that have been probably explained here over the weekend, and there's plenty of books around it. But I'm just going to sort of stay on this particular track, because I think the misconception, particularly between a lot of modern Christians, is that if the Catholic Church used to do that the leopard has now changed its spots. But the leopard doesn't change its spots. We sort of know that. And so take, for example, Mormonism. Just because they're bigger today than they were 100 years ago doesn't make their doctrine right. It's just, things have been buried. So I think we need to keep in the focus that the Catholic Church in particular hasn't changed its stripes, no matter how much we have Catholic friends and neighbours. So I want to sort of set the groundwork, but I'm not going to cover off on that. I'm going to sort of consider this maybe like a sequel, I guess, to that particular message. So my disclaimer is that. So here we go. By show of hands, who knows what an Ashkani Jew is? Oh, or an Ashkani or Askani? Ashkenazi. I actually have a very dry mouth, so if I can get some water, Pez, that'd be amazing. So for those that you don't know, if you were actually to poll... Oh, hang on, I've got to press my clicker. My bad. Oh, there we go. So for those of you that don't know, if you were to poll, say, 1,000 Christians today, there'd be probably only about 10% that would actually know what this is. Essentially what it is, or who they are, I should say. There we go. Oh, here we go. So essentially it's someone who can't necessarily trace their lineage back to the tribe of Judah. The promises given to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob don't necessarily apply, or at least not to the full. The world doesn't differentiate between Ashkani. How'd you say it, Fred? Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi. I always thought it was Ashkani, but Ashkenazi, yeah, we'll leave it. And an authentic, what I would consider an authentic Jew. And what the majority of the Jews are today, even in modern Israel. And in fact, actually I'll come back to that in just a minute. So essentially anybody by choice, marriage, association, will therefore be considered one of these particular types of Jews. I'll have my glass of water, hey? I'll call it Askani. All right, pronunciation. Now, a few years ago, I don't know if you know, but Madonna actually called herself a Jew. Did you all? I don't know if you saw this, but she thought it was trendy, so she became a Jew. So there's a great example of where by association you can be considered. So it's more to do with belief system, marriage, and association, rather than bloodline back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So so I think that's important. Few little quick facts is, so it emerged in Germany, and which at the time was actually a branch of the Holy Roman Empire. So by 1930, 22% of all Jews in the world were this. And let me do this. And today, it's about 75%. So Einstein, Spielberg, and our own Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe, are all Ashkenazi, there you go, Jews. So very important to keep in mind as I bring it all together. By show of hands, who knows what Jesuits are? There we go, room of people. So quick little recap again. If you were to poll 1,000 modern Christians, would they know what a Jesuit is? I would probably say no. In fact, it's a real shame that they don't, because they're in amongst all of us. So founded in 1514 as the Pope's Secret Service. Sorry? Oh my goodness, what did I say again? Oh my goodness. So Pope's Secret Service and Army, precursor to a lot of the secret societies actually, Freemasons included. 33, the highest level of Freemasonry, it's believed that they actually do the Jesuit oath. Members take a lifelong oath, and it's done in blood, so it actually is forever, which is incredibly alarming. But I want to highlight some of the components to the oath for those of you, either it's a refresher or you didn't know, because it's actually interesting in context. It's only about 500 words long. And this is just one. I'll pull out a couple of bits, but this is just one. I do now renounce and disown any allegiance is due to any heretical king, prince or state named Protestant or Liberal, or obedience to any of their laws or magistrates or officers, which is phenomenal. And we think that this doesn't happen today. It sure does. Another example, a little bit further down. I do further declare that the doctrine of the Church of England and Scotland, Calvinist, Huguenots, and others in the name of Protestant or Liberal, to be damnable, and themselves be damned, who will not forsake the same. So basically, side with me or else. Now this is another interesting one that block your ears. I do furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war secretly or openly against all heretics, Protestants and Liberals, as I am directed to, expirate them from the face of the earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, condition, etc., etc., etc. You can read it, but it goes on and on and on. But you get the idea. So this is an oath that people have taken historically and are still taking today, essentially leading to Jesuits are to do whatever it takes, become whoever they need to be, and infiltrate wherever they need to for the good of the Pope. The fact that Christians don't understand this today really sort of scares me, because it's every single institution I've looked at that is ungodly in sort of nature has a root cause to a lot of these particular beliefs. And a few years ago when Obama was floating around, people were like, he's the Antichrist. And I said, he doesn't need to be the Antichrist. I mean, at the end of the day, the organisation around him that's been propagating his message and whatever else at the time, is essentially infiltrated by these particular types of people. So when old mate knocked his 99 Thesis to the door, one of the things that Martin Luther, one of the things that the Jesuits got to work on was the Counter-Reformation. And I was actually talking to Warren just before, and he actually said, isn't it interesting? I'm going to butcher this one, I do apologise. But isn't it interesting that, this Prince of Darkness tends to replicate but never do exact, which is very true. So the Counter-Reformation was an example of this. So the Protestant Reformation was happening at the time, and the Pope was losing people, and that particular thesis that he knocked on the door was actually also highlighting how bad the Pope was and the connections with the Antichrist. And so the Jesuits got into action and started this particular campaign. Now, it was a marketing campaign primarily, but it sort of evolved also into persecution. So if you look at Wikipedia, Wikipedia talks about all the friendly stuff, that they were out there doing things like Catholic, setting up churches and missionary work and establishing schools, colleges, and seminary colleges around the world. And pretty much every particular organisation, such as Harvard, Yale and Oxford, which all start off with Christian values and roots, had all sort of been infiltrated by this at some point or another. So this was a really big event that they participated in. Here's a great little picture I showed Warren just before I got up here. I said, this is where the world sort of looks at things and they go, I don't know if you can spot the difference for those that have grandkids or kids, or even just know Star Wars. But the one on your right is a knockoff from China, and this is essentially what the Prince of Darkness does, as Warren and I were just sort of talking just before, and everything that the I guess that the Vatican gets involved in, there's a slight manipulation or a slight corruption there. So when the Catholic Church sort of goes into a community in order to proselytise, I guess, they're always following prior to the Reformation, they actually never did any missionary work. It was actually all post. And so once the British and the Pilgrims went out there and started sort of sharing the gospel and feeding the hungry, they followed suit, but they did it with a slight negative bent. So I'd just like to sort of show this particular picture because I think it's quite funny. But this is a dude who's seen this name before. Yep, beautiful room. So this guy here, so he wrote the book, The Coming of the Messiah, and essentially he couldn't get it published, or he couldn't get noticed as Manuel Lacunza. So in the end, he wrote under a pen name. But it was the first futurist interpretation of the prophetic books of the Bible. And then over time, his messages got infiltrated into Oxford, Yale and Harvard, as we now see today. And unfortunately now every other seminary college follows suit. So Ben Ezra is still a footnote in many Bibles and concordances, but he was a Jesuit. And so I think based on the oath, we should definitely understand that this guy fits the bill for become whoever I need to be and infiltrate wherever I need to be for the good of the Pope. So the question is, how does this now connect? Well, let's move on to the Rothschild Bank. So, again, by show of hands, we all know what the Rothschild Bank is. We've all heard this before, I'm assuming. So, notice the coat of arms. That's quite interesting, isn't it? So this is actually their logo before they decided to disassociate themselves with this particular star. Because, so Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who was born 1744, I said that one correct, began his business at 16, which I mentioned before. He had 5 sons. He sent them across all of Europe to all the different places. So Frankfurt, Germany. He was already in Frankfurt, sorry. But my goodness, went to blank. Naples, and to basically set up all these other banks. But in one foul swoop, I'm not sure if you know the history, but in one foul swoop, he actually took over essentially the whole English economy, and he did it in 1815 with the Battle of Waterloo. So the Rothschilds were so clever; they actually had an Ozpost network better than anybody else at the time, better than countries. And so they got their spies to send message over to Nathan Rothschild, who was in London at the time, got them to send the spies over there a full day before the British government even got the information that they'd won in Waterloo. And he spread a rumour that they'd lost. So then everybody sold their shares and bonds in the country. He went in and bought them all up. The next day, away you go. So pretty incredible. However, remember that date, 1760. This is only like 45 years after he started selling coins. This is the son too, by the way, but only 45 years after he started selling coins. So these have always plagued me in my mind, because I've sat there and I thought it just seems too soon. You know, too soon to be able to do such a big transaction, have the confidence to do it and the money to pull it off. Yet all you're doing selling coins 40 years earlier. I find that really really interesting. But it's an interesting piece of history. So the great question that I've been asking for essentially almost 20 years now is, how does a family with less than one generation of experience from a different country and from a different religion become a banker of the world's most important empire? I think that's an interesting question we should ask, because I believe that this gap of time, which is essentially 70 odd years, he was 16 when he started, so it's kind of a bit interesting as to, you know, exactly 70 years. But I think there's a real interesting gap in here. So example being, right, if I wanted to become, say, Elon Musk's banker, right, what would I have to do? Like, to stress test this theory, what would I have to do? I'd first have to probably get qualified, because they're probably, you know, between me versus other people, I'm not a banker. He'd probably choose somebody who's a banker, right? Second one is I'd have to move to his country. The third one is I'd have to probably infiltrate his social networks. The fourth one is I'd probably have to get trusted by his social networks. Fifth one is he'd have to give me a little bit of money. Sixth one is, hopefully, within your lifetime, he gives you the lot. The difference is that the Vatican at the time and the Roman Empire was potentially a third of the world. So how does one family who's, well, I didn't even mention, I would have to convert to his religion in order for trust to be built. So how does a family with seemingly no history at all with the Vatican all of a sudden become their banker within the space of essentially 60 or 70 years? I find that really sort of intriguing. So my argument is, I actually think they were Jesuits. I think the whole way along. I think they took the oath. Now, did they start off as a Ashkenani Jew or Ashkenani Jew? Highly likely. And the reason I say that is because, you know, if you use whatever record you can find of when Amschel was actually born in Frankfurt, Germany, allegedly, he was born into a Jewish family, right? So did they tap him on the shoulder? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, at the end of the day, we've seen history in the last, say, 20 years, 20, 30 years, where the governments have, you know, hijacked a campaign and used it for their own good. Case in point was a couple of years ago, I had the chance to interview a guy by the name of Lord Christopher Monckton. About 15 years ago, he was a big whistleblower because all these documents were released by the government, not by the government, I shouldn't say that, by one of the universities that was tracking the weather. And I know this is not friendly with certain circles, but the documents, all our weather data on a worldwide basis is collected by 3 institutions. And what these documents were, there was 3,000 emails, and it was showing collusion between these 3 organisations in order to keep the narrative alive that we're in a global warming crisis. Now that came out. Now it's been buried now, 15 years ago. Everyone's forgotten, they're back on their gravy train, right? But the story is that Margaret Thatcher actually put that institution together because she was getting pressure from the Greenies. And so when they were giving her curry, she said, well, that's fine, no worries. I'll go do some research and we'll figure this out, right? She was actually very good about it. She went and did the research. The problem was the result was 0. Well, not 0, but negligible. And so, you know, these new scientists that have had a great pay packet have got a BMW in the driveway, private school kids, and the wife wants a new handbag. They're sitting there going, this is not good for business. So essentially they changed the data, and so the institutions continued, and it came out that this is still going even to this day. I read a book years ago called Seeds of Deception, fascinating book, where a guy actually was told to do this study on a tomato seed, and it turned out it wasn't great for human consumption, and so the people who authorised it said, oh, that's a shame because it's been in the market for 2 years. And the guy came out as a whistleblower. Well, guess what? He lost the BMW, the wife didn't get the handbag, and the kids were kicked out of the private school. So if you want to toe the line, you have to play the game. But the point I'm sort of making is that Margaret Thatcher didn't invent global warming, right? At the end of the day, it gets hijacked, you know. And so in this scenario, were the Rothschilds, you know, already showing promise? Possibly, maybe. The second theory is they were sent from Rome. Now, if they were sent from Rome, bit of a funny sort of way of explaining it, but if you rock up with 5 kids in tow and a couple of bags of money and a yarmulke on your head, people don't ask any questions, right? They're not going to drop your DAX to check whether it's legit or not. So at the end of the day, I thought you'd like that, Phil, but no, at the end of the day, the reality is that's another theory, because if a guy rocks up with a clipboard and a high-vis vest, you let him in your house. Sometimes we don't double check. So the connection between these particular people and the Vatican, I think, is certainly there. The question, though, is why? You guessed it, control. So I believe that they had a few problems. So the first problem, public executions were not working anymore. No surprise there. Eventually, people figure it out. So and helping the poor was not really effective in keeping people in line. Second one is the followers of Christ continued to spread across the world. How good is that? Bypassing the Catholic Church structure. England was making incredible grounds with technology and industrialisation and spreading across the world. They were obviously founding new lands. And last one is people still believe the Catholic Church to be the Antichrist. So they had a problem. And I think they came up with a solution that we're still dealing with to this day, which I think they split. And I don't think this is spoken about very often or enough. So I'm a big proponent to sort of believe that around that 1932, that's when the master plan was revealed. I think that the slavery through money and finance had begun. Social conscience in the world, the good guy strategy, is what the Catholic Church became. So I think that this is where everything I've sort of said up until this point is incredibly provable, but this to me is where the evidence points, if that makes sense. This is where I seem to think that it lands. I think going back to what I was saying before is just because we can't see it or it's not present in our life in an obvious way, or our school teacher isn't telling us that this is the truth, we tend not to realise that it's actually happening, and it happens all around us. Amschel Rothschild said, "Let me issue the control of the nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." So he was well and truly. And Australia is prone to this. In fact, it's not even prone to this. If you want me to go into detail, the RBA is not owned by the Australian people. The Constitution which we stand by and which we have on plaques here and everything else, the RBA is not involved with that at all. So, and I can show that maybe later through question time. So, stealth slavery. So control of issuing of the base money, which is control of the central banks, ownership of public infrastructure, investment of private companies, intentionally devaluing currency, and basically stripping every citizen of time, talent, and resources. I mean, it's modern day slavery. And the Catholic Church figured it out, and they figured out how they can do it. At the time, Frankfurt was the financial capital of the world. I might actually jump through to a little bit of a conclusion at the end and then come back just quickly. Oh no, I'll have to cycle through. Sorry, no, that won't work. I don't know how these clickers work. So I think that, so the modern slavery, which is, as you see there, is well and truly present. And it's present in every country. In fact, I think North Korea is the only country now not to have a central bank that's controlled by the Vatican or the Rothschilds, the banking elite. A few years ago, funny enough, Libya was on that list, and then Obama went into Libya. In fact, I actually predicted Obama was going to be president. I said that to my old man because Hillary and Obama were going against each other, and I said, no. I said, don't worry about that. I said, Hillary's not going to be it. I said, it'll be Obama. He'll be first, and then she'll be next. Well, funny enough, Trump sort of disrupted that. Poor woman. But in actual fact, I knew Obama because he goes, after he went in, how do you know? I said, well, there needs to be a battle in Africa. And he goes, what for? I said, well, there's two reasons. One is there's a lot of resources there that China wants. I said, second one is that there's countries there that don't have central banks, that are controlled by, like, they're smaller countries, but controlled by the banking elite. And I said, no disrespect, but, you know, a black man invades Africa a bit easier than a white woman would. So I think it was just part of the plan. But that being said, too, 25 years ago, there was two other countries that weren't on the list of no central bank controlled by the Vatican, and that was Afghanistan and Iraq, funny enough, and we all know what happened there. So very interesting as to sort of how it happens. So how does it affect us? That's the question, because that is the bit that I like to sort of make sure that we're covering off on. I have a Monopoly story. So nobody loves Monopoly. That I can always get a hand in the room for. But the problem is we play Monopoly wrong. The real rules of Monopoly state that as you go around the board, if you land on a property and you can't afford to buy it or you don't want to buy it, it actually has to go to auction. Now, when it goes to auction, if you've got four players, everyone gets $1,500. So what's the most that a property can go for? $1,500. If two people are married, what's the most the property can go for? $3,000. If somebody can borrow against the bank or against some other asset, what can it go for? Well, almost unlimited, right? So what we see today is the value of things that would have been great if I had to press that at the same time. What we see today is the value of things don't change, or very rarely change, right? You probably can't tell me that a bottle of Coke today versus 20 years ago is really much difference. Bad English. Isn't very different. But what has happened, right, is the price of it's gone up. So why has the price of it gone up? Well, let's go back to Monopoly. If you got four players, but two people have got together and borrowed with each other and they can both do $3,000, what's the most the market is going to go for that property? It's now $3,000, legitimately, right? So if there's more money being created and it goes into the system, what's going to happen? It's naturally going to drive prices up. Now, the problem with this is that we have people who are struggling, right? Look at this. So this is a great little, you probably remember these ads. 1983, 1987, I wasn't even born here. Actually, 1985 I was born, so this is bang smack in the middle. But look at this, Metal E, $1, Coke, $1.16, Dynamo, $4.99. I did this literally this morning, and there you go, that's today. All right, so we're $14 for Dynamo, $4 for Coke, and I'll show you this one here because it's really easy to understand. So you can see here that the price has gone up. Now, how does this connect? Well, again, it's modern slavery, right? It's extracting talent, it's extracting time, it's extracting the life out of people. Like, we are definitely in that realm at the moment, and here is some interesting proof. So, modern equivalent of slavery. So, this is an interesting quote from Amschel again. So he says, few who understand the system will either will either be so interested from its profits or so dependent on its favours that there will be no opposition from that class. And I think this is really interesting when you think about the people that we're dealing with today and the families, and there's really this big divide between the two, the haves and have-nots. But I almost want to sort of start to finish on this particular slide, because this is essentially what's going on. And it's funny because Perry didn't know what I was actually going to talk about, and I said, are people actually going to be interested in this kind of topic? And he goes, we're going to have all sorts this year. So I said, cool. I believe some of these things have been covered, but I want to just sort of highlight. I was in Washington, D.C. about 10 years ago, and we were on the bus, the tour bus, and the tour guide, and I didn't actually know the history of Washington, D.C., but on the tour guide, he actually said, he goes, do you know all the police here are actually controlled by the Secret Service? Oh, right, yeah, that's interesting. Now, normal person will go, oh, well, of course, White House and what have you. But it's the only country in the world where that's the case, right, where the actual town that it is surrounded is also controlled. Now, you would have thought that Washington police would communicate with Secret Service, but they're all part of the Secret Service. And the reason being is because, let's go back to the Jesuits for a minute. Washington, D.C. is sitting on a plot of land that isn't controlled by the American people. They can make any rules that they want. They actually operate under maritime law, funny enough, because in maritime law, there's certain things about jurisdictions and areas being cordoned off, and rules can be made inside that without any repercussions. So that's Washington, D.C. That's military, right? So the military is sort of housed there. And I know people will argue, oh, yeah, but that's, what about the Federal Reserve? I'm just telling you now, money isn't in America. It's not. It's actually in the City of London. Now, the City of London, the middle one, the financial, this is what was set up back in 1815 with Nathan Rothschild, is that he set up a square mile in the middle of London City, and he called it City of London, right? Notice the difference in language? So if I order a pizza and somebody says, Ricxon Beau, I'm probably not likely to say yes if I'm standing there waiting for my pizza, because I'm waiting for the trigger word, Beau Ricxon, right? So what they did is they actually used a word or a combination of words that make it sound similar but not the same, because the legal entities are actually named two different things. So there's London City, and then there's City of London. And the City of London is actually this square mile that's another plot of land that the British people don't control or have any jurisdiction in, which is interesting. And that's where the financial capital of this whole thing is. And then social, obviously you could see is the Vatican. So in the last 200 years, what's the Catholic Church done? They've become the good guys. So between these three entities or locations, I sort of know what's going on. And so I don't get too hung up on the day-to-day sort of what's going on in the media. It doesn't really bother me. But whenever I see these three players involved in anything, I know what's going on. A friend of mine asked me that one day because when I was researching this, 15 years ago, he goes, oh, you're going a bit quiet on all this stuff. I said, well, I think I figured it out. And I said, I don't really need to, because he was, talking about, at the time, it was Obama this and Obama that, and I'm like, I'm not interested. I already know what's happening. At the end of the day, they're just pawns, they're puppets. So there you go. So is there something we can? Oh, here we go. So is there something that we can do? The answer is, of course, yes. Take control. This is the thing why my passion for young people, particularly, because they get hoodwinked into this message that they get from New York, the marketing capital of the world, that they need to buy a big house, big car, new TV, all that kind of stuff. Have 0 kids now is the message. People are getting vasectomies at bloody, 10 years old. It's horrific. So they're not understanding who's giving them that message, right? The rob, kill and destroy message is very, very strong. And I believe very strongly that none of this has changed. None of this has disappeared. We're just seeing a different cloak. We're just seeing a different, and we have for 200 years. And we like to sit here and say, the Vatican this, the Vatican that. Well, this is how they're doing it today. We can argue with the whole gender ideology and things like that, but every single young person today, every single one of us, has, I polled my staff and I said, who's got credit cards? All of them lift their hands up. I'm sitting there thinking, my goodness. And I haven't even touched on the fact that every time you use a credit card, the price of things go up because these people keep pumping capital and dollars into the system. I probably didn't explain it as well as I could have, but the monopoly analogy is that these banks are just writing money like you won't believe, and that just artificially bumps the prices up. Years ago you could buy a house. I mean, Fred would know this back when he was, in the supermarket. You could buy a house on half an income. Now they don't even look at you without dual income because they know it's just not affordable. So, making godly decisions is part of the solution. Homeschooling your children is part of the solution. I won't make any excuses about that. We will. There is not enough money in the world to send our kids to a traditional school. Saying no to usury, whether it be a credit card, car loan, whatever. If you can't afford it, you don't buy it. Because all those things from an ethical perspective is you're actually contributing to the process. And we work very hard, my wife and I, we work very hard for this, just to basically stay away from all those trappings, because we know who is behind it all and what their agenda is, and that's really important to us. Beautiful. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you listening.